My name is Clarissa Vance, and over time I've learned how to keep my strength understated. It was a warm Sunday evening when my sister hosted her engagement dinner at our parents' house. The place was full. Uncles, cousins, even childhood neighbors who still believed they had a front-row view into my life. The table was packed, laughter bouncing off the walls, and wine poured without restraint. Still, I couldn't ignore the way their gazes settled on me, as if I didn't quite fit in. "Are you still driving that small gray car?" Someone called out, loud enough to draw a few amused chuckles. My sister shot me a glance wrapped in fake concern. "She's just practical," she said. Clarissa has always known how to make things last. Her fiancé gave a polite laugh, unaware of the subtext, but I wasn't. Everyone else was. I simply smiled and took a sip of water. I didn't owe anyone an explanation. Then, just as the plates were being cleared, her fiancé leaned forward casually and asked, "Hey, Clarissa, this might sound random, but do you have anything to do with a jet I saw in St. Bart's last weekend?" It had something like Vance Capital written on it. The room fell completely silent. Forks paused midair. With a faint smile, I replied, "Yes, that would be me." It had been this way for years. Every family gathering followed the same pattern. Pleasant questions that weren't really questions, subtle remarks disguised as concern. To them, I was the outsider, the daughter who never settled, who lived in a different zip code, who never brought a partner, who didn't share baby shower pictures or beach vacations on Facebook. At first, I made an effort. I sent gifts, remembered birthdays, and even offered to cover dinner now and then, thinking it might change something. Instead, it backfired. One year, I offered to pay part of my niece's school tuition, and my sister told everyone I was trying to buy her approval. After that, I stopped offering. I moved to Seattle at 22 and rarely looked back. They called it running away. I called it finally breathing. The early years weren't easy. I jumped between jobs, lived in a windowless basement, and survived mostly on rice and eggs. Eventually, I started a side project, a basic software tool to help independent couriers manage deliveries more efficiently. It didn't even have a name at first. I coded at night, worked customer support during the day, and burned out more than once. 3 years later, a logistics company in Singapore discovered it, reached out, and asked if I'd ever considered scaling it. I hadn't, but I decided to try. With some support and a lot of caffeine, I expanded it. The company grew steadily, a seed round, then series of funding. By 35, I had a full team, a headquarters, international clients, and a confidential sale that earned me more money than my parents had ever imagined. Still, I kept my old car. I didn't need another one. I preferred the quiet it brought. But none of that mattered to my family. All they noticed was what I didn't say. I didn't wear designer labels, didn't boast, didn't explain my travel plans when I disappeared on holidays. So they filled in the blanks with their own assumptions. "She's always been independent," my mother would say at dinners, her smile tight. "Never wanted a husband or a home." Once, during Thanksgiving, my aunt leaned in and whispered, "At least your sister turned out normal." At first, those words hurt. Then they became almost amusing. Now, they were nothing but background noise, static I'd long since learned to ignore. They believed I was struggling simply because I didn't display wealth in ways they recognized, because I didn't need their approval to feel accomplished, because I refused to chase validation at a table built on shallow values. Even so, I attended that dinner, not for them but for myself. I had my own reasons. Watching their expressions freeze at the mention of that jet wasn't planned, but I won't deny, it felt satisfying. There was a time when I believed I could earn my way back into their acceptance. I thought love, especially within a family, could be negotiated, that if I worked harder, gave more, proved myself enough, they would finally see me differently, maybe even truly see me. When I was 28, I was hospitalized with a ruptured appendix that turned septic. Recovery took weeks. Not a single phone call. Not a card. The roommate I barely knew, someone I'd found on Craigslist, was the one who brought me soup and helped me through it. My own mother didn't even know I'd nearly died. Or maybe she did, and simply chose not to care. That was the moment I stopped expecting anything from them. I no longer sent holiday messages. Birthdays passed without acknowledgement. I created distance slowly, so quietly they hardly noticed, if they noticed at all. And even if they did, perhaps pride kept them silent. But distancing myself emotionally didn't mean cutting them off completely. I still attended major events. I still brought thoughtful gifts. I still played the role of the eccentric older sister, because it was far easier than explaining why I chose to keep my distance. A part of me, despite everything, still held on to hope that maybe one day something would change, that they might finally ask what I was working on with real curiosity, that they would see me not as a warning story, but as someone who had forged her own path and endured. But that moment never came. When my business began to succeed, I kept it to myself. I didn't tell them when I hired my first employee, when we reached $2 million in recurring revenue, or even when I signed the acquisition deal that paid me enough to retire twice over. What would have been the point? They wouldn't have believed me, or worse, they would have twisted it into something else. My mother would have accused me of showing off, and my sister would have told everyone I was lying. So I learned to keep my wins private. Instead, I invested the money into a new venture, one I intentionally didn't name after myself, something sustainable, something that created opportunities for others. I stayed out of the spotlight. I flew coach, even when I didn't have to. My team knew who I was, and my partners respected me. That was enough. But it wasn't just my finances that changed, it was me. I no longer felt the need to prove my worth to anyone. I didn't carry that quiet ache of being excluded from the inner circle anymore. I had built my own place, slowly and deliberately, piece by piece. Still, there was a certain irony in it all. After years of making myself smaller to avoid judgment, the truth was about to land right in front of them. Over dessert, delivered not by me, but by the man my sister was about to marry. And I knew she would hate that, because in her world, there was only space for one success story, and she had already claimed it, complete with the diamond ring, the planned honeymoon, and the matching luggage set she couldn't stop flaunting on Instagram. I hadn't come that evening to disrupt anything. I truly hadn't. But when life presents you with a moment like that, you don't hesitate. You hold your glass steady, you smile, and you let the truth rest there on the table, bright and undeniable. The evening itself had been arranged to perfection. White string lights shimmered along the backyard fence, and a long dining table was set with navy linens and gold cutlery. Classy, my sister had called it, wearing a smile that never quite reached her eyes. A private chef had been hired. Servers dressed in black moved quietly between courses, and soft jazz drifted through hidden speakers. It was her moment, and she had planned every detail down to the second. I arrived 20 minutes late on purpose, not enough to make an entrance, just enough to avoid forced smiles and shallow conversation. I parked a block away, walked the rest in heels that didn't belong to any designer label, and slipped in through the side gate with the confidence of someone accustomed to being underestimated. My mother met me at the patio doors, her voice overly sweet. "Clarissa, we weren't sure you'd show," which really meant they had hoped I wouldn't. Seconds later, my sister glided over, dressed like she had stepped out of an engagement photo shoot. Champagne silk, a sparkling ring, and that familiar glint in her eyes when she looked at me. "You look cozy," she said, scanning my black sheath dress with a tight, controlled smile. "You've always had such simple taste. Simple, practical, frugal." Every word was just another way of calling me small. I smiled lightly. "Good to see you too." The table buzzed with conversation. Congratulations for my niece landing a PR internship, praise for my cousin's boyfriend, who had just been promoted at Chase. I nodded politely when attention shifted my way, but no one asked what I had been doing. They never did. Long ago, it had already been decided that I didn't belong in their version of success. I was the odd one out, the independent one, the woman who chose freedom because, in their minds, she simply couldn't secure a husband. I sipped my water and let their voices pass over me. Sometimes, that was easier than fighting to be heard. By the third course, the tone began to shift. Uncle Jeff leaned closer with a chuckle. "Still driving that old Honda? I used to joke that that thing had seen more miles than your father's old lawnmower." The table filled with laughter, not sharp or malicious, just the kind that comes from habit, easy and dismissive, wrapped in quiet condescension. Someone else chimed in. saying that Carissa had always loved digging through bargain bins. They brought up those handmade Christmas presents, laughing as they asked who actually makes hand soap from scratch anymore. Then my sister joined in with an exaggerated sigh, saying I had always stayed so grounded, never letting success change me. She turned to her fiancé and added that I had never really cared about appearances. I looked at her from across the table, straight through that flawless smile. It was obvious she was trying to impress him by putting me down, and for a moment, I thought he was playing along too. But then he turned toward me, his head tilting slightly with curiosity. He asked if I was Clarissa Vance, his brow tightening as he repeated the name, wondering aloud about Vance Capital. My sister blinked in confusion, asking what he meant. He went on to explain that he had seen my name on a jet the previous weekend while scouting honeymoon locations in St. Bart's. He described a Gulfstream G600 sitting on the tarmac and mentioned that the concierge had said the owner was based in Seattle. He had assumed it was just a coincidence. The atmosphere shifted instantly. Forks paused in midair, and wine glasses stopped just before reaching lips. I slowly lifted my gaze, met his eyes, and answered calmly and precisely that it was me. A beat of silence followed, then another. My cousin's jaw fell open. My mother's eyes narrowed as if she were trying to recalculate everything she thought she knew about me. My sister turned pale, noticeably pale, and her fiancé simply blinked, his lips parting as though he wanted to say something more but couldn't quite find the words. Eventually, he managed to ask if I was the one who had closed the deal with Eastern Freight the previous year, mentioning how massive that merger had been. I didn't answer because I didn't need to. The truth was already louder than anything I could add. My sister let out a strained laugh, first brushing it off as a joke, then more quietly asking if I was serious. Instead of responding, I stood up slowly, folded my napkin, and placed it neatly on my plate. I said I had an early flight and needed to leave. My mother quickly protested that dessert hadn't even been served yet, but I simply acknowledged her and moved on. As I walked around the table, I could feel every pair of eyes following me, people who had spent years not asking questions or listening, now suddenly desperate to redefine me in their minds. But I wasn't there to help them catch up. As I reached the gate, I heard someone whisper in disbelief that I owned a jet. No one came after me, and I didn't turn around. The walk to my car felt unusually long. Maybe it was the silence trailing behind me like smoke, or maybe it was the strange lightness in my chest, as though I had finally set something heavy down for good. I got into the driver's seat, closed the door, and sat there for a moment with my hands resting on the wheel, staring ahead. Behind me, the porch lights still glowed. Inside, my sister was probably already crafting a new version of the story, something that could explain everything away. Maybe she'd say I had gotten lucky, or that I was just a silent partner, or that it was all exaggerated, anything that would let her remain the center of the family narrative. But this time, the story had changed, and she wasn't the one controlling it. The truth was, I didn't care whether they believed it or not. I wasn't searching for validation anymore. Still, it felt different because the revelation hadn't come from me. It had come from someone they respected, someone they wanted to impress. That made it real to them in a way my own words never could. For the first time, they had to face who I truly was instead of who they had always assumed I'd be. I hadn't needed that moment, and I hadn't planned it, but it arrived anyway, steady and unstoppable, like the tide. I drove home in silence, the windows down as the cool night air brushed against my face. There was a quiet freedom in not having to explain yourself anymore, a kind of peace in no longer shrinking to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. Later that night, around midnight, I received a message. It was from my sister's fiancé. He apologized if things had felt awkward earlier, saying he hadn't meant to put me on the spot and that he genuinely respected what I had accomplished. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. I thanked him and said I was used to awkward situations, that what happened tonight had simply been clarity. He saw the message immediately and responded with a thumbs up. That was enough. I lay awake in bed, staring up at the ceiling as it became a silent canvas where memories began to paint themselves without invitation. I drifted back to being 12, sitting alone on the back porch steps while my sister celebrated her birthday inside with a party I wasn't allowed to attend because it was only for her friends. I had helped my mother bake the cake, yet no one thought to save me even a single slice. Another memory surfaced prom night, when I stood by the window, watching my cousin laugh and pose for pictures in the front yard, surrounded by family. I hadn't been invited, and no one even asked if I had a dress. Then I thought of my father, long gone now, who used to ruffle my hair and say, "She's the practical one. The other one's the pretty one." Those small words became quiet wounds over the years, the kind that cut so deeply you end up bleeding in places no one can see. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother, short and sharp. "Why didn't you ever tell us about your business?" I didn't respond, not out of anger, but because the question wasn't rooted in genuine curiosity. It was about control, about reshaping the past, so they wouldn't have to face how easily they had dismissed me for so many years. My silence felt like the only honest answer. By midday, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in over a year suddenly reached out, cheerfully suggesting we grab coffee and reconnect. Then another message came, and another. All at once, I had become interesting. Suddenly, I mattered. But I had waited far too long for those invitations, and now they meant nothing. They weren't about truly knowing me. They were about getting close to a story that had changed. I declined each time with politeness, not bitterness, just clarity. 2 days later, my assistant confirmed that the Street Bart's jet had been prepared for a new charter. I booked a last-minute seat, not because I needed to run away, but because I had finally earned the freedom to leave things behind. Seated in the cabin with a glass of mineral water in hand, I gazed out at the endless ocean below. Sunlight struck the wing at just the right angle, carving a clean, glowing line through the clouds. I smiled, not because I was flying private, but because, for the first time, I was truly free. Not everything requires confrontation. Sometimes the strongest choice is to say nothing at all, to walk away mid-performance and leave the audience sitting in their own silence. For years, I believed my worth depended on proving them wrong. Now I understand the truth. My value was never tied to their recognition. It exists in every line of code I wrote alone in a dim apartment when no one believed in me. It lives in every team I built, every decision I made, every risk I took when failure seemed inevitable. It shows in the way I refused to grow bitter, even when I had every reason to. It exists quietly, steadily, within me. I once believed closure meant having the final word, that if I explained everything clearly enough, they would finally see me and understand. But closure isn't always loud. Sometimes, it's found in a quiet plane ride away from people who never truly looked beyond the version of you they created. It's the soft click of a door closing behind you. Not dramatic, not forceful, just final and clean. I know my family still talks. They reshape the narrative, turn me into a mystery, maybe even the villain. Perhaps they say I've changed, grown cold, or forgotten where I came from. Let them. I no longer exist within their version of me. I've outgrown it. I don't need understanding from those who were never curious. I don't need applause from a table where I was never truly welcome. I don't need to hear them admit they were wrong. I already know they were. What I needed, what I fought so hard to find, was peace. And I found it the moment I stopped shrinking myself to fit something they could recognize. They will continue to speculate, to talk, but I no longer feel the need to respond. I live in spaces they will never enter. I create things they will never see. I make choices without hearing their voices in my mind. And in its own quiet way, that is power. Sometimes, the most radical form of healing isn't revenge or confrontation. It's simply living fully on your own terms and letting others sit with what they lost. I didn't attend that dinner to prove anything, yet they saw the truth anyway. Not because I forced it, but because truth doesn't need a stage, it only needs a moment. And when that moment comes, you don't hesitate or perform. You simply stand there, exactly as you are, and allow the silence to speak for itself.